Welcome, 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 everybody. This is the January 2023 edition of the Lisa Parento Mastermind. Super excited to see you all, first of all, and lots of new folks on here, as well as team members, and really, really excited to have our special guest today, Katie Weldon. Actually, Christine Brousseau, who texted me a couple of weeks back, and she said, "Hey, what's the story with a 2-for-1 buy down?" I said, no idea. hold on. Hold my coffee. And I texted Katie. It was early in the morning. I texted Katie and I'm like, "Hey, do you do 2-for-1 buy down? What is it?" She goes, "Yeah, of course." I said, "Okay, great. Would you be a mastermind guest in January?" And just so you know, we are working on the calendar actually for the first 6 months of the year, but let me know, team members or anybody, if there's just kind of a gnawing question of something that you're wanting to know about, and I'm happy to see if we can serve you with the mastermind. But what I love about this mastermind in particular is that, first of all, Katie is brilliant. Way back in the day when this wasn't a thing, when we couldn't get a buyer's offer accepted who didn't have cash, Katie said, "Well, we have this thing called the Greenlight program, and we will actually put buyers into underwriting. So if they are comfortable enough and risk, and not super risk averse, they could actually waive a mortgage contingency." And now it's kind of a commonplace thing, but it wasn't 2.5 years ago, and Katie was one of the first that brought that to us, which really helped a number of our clients be able to be competitive in those days of the 27 and 31 offers, when we were all wondering what in the heck we were going to do if our buyers didn't have cash. So Katie has always represented not just fabulous customer service, not just a great lender in total mortgage, but also some innovations. And she's got some interesting ones to share with us this morning, as well as something about some great info for sellers whose listings might be getting a little stale if they hadn't been snapped right up. And we all have a couple of those. So I am super excited to turn this over to Katie. All right.
Thank
I'm
you
going to
so
mute
much.
myself. Yeah. Okay. Go, Katie. Go. Love it.
All right.
Love
So I'm
it.
going to be sharing a presentation, but I just want to introduce myself. Katie Weldon, also known as Katie the Mortgage Lady. And now I have Team Katie. So I have a few members of my team on the call as well. Just a quick shout out to Jessica. If you don't use her for your transaction coordinator services, I can just tell you 100% when I see an offer come through with her name on it, because she's part of it, I'm like, yes, like I have all the information I need. Like, she's fantastic. I highly recommend it. It's well worth your while, so you can go out and get more business instead of focusing on the stuff that you don't want to. So I'm going to start my presentation. It is a little bit lengthy, but if anyone has any questions, I don't mind if you just unmute yourself and just interrupt, because I may not see you do your hand, depending, because I'm going to be sharing my screen. So no worries if you want to just unmute and just ask a question and stop me in between. I'm totally fine with that. I would rather get your questions answered while we're talking about a certain topic, so that we can discuss it as we go along. Is that okay with you, Lisa?
Absolutely. Or, jot them down, put them in the chat. We might be able to jump in, but we always will leave some time at the end for questions and to share, because it's got to be as interactive. This is for the agents and for our teams. So.
Absolutely. Okay, awesome. So I already introduced myself. Some of my team is on this call, but we titled this training Creative Financing for Savvy Agents and Their Clients, because it's really important both on the buying side and the seller side to consider financing and how that will help clients. So there we are. That's my team logo there. So there's a lot of different creative financing options. Some of them help some sellers, some help buyers. I like to think of everything for the greater good of all in mind, because obviously a happy seller and a happy buyer is a happy transaction and is a happy realtor. So I'm going to kind of go over the general topics, and then we'll go over each one individually. So the first one I listed was the 2-1 buy down. That's what Lisa had asked about. And I'll go into the logistics of all of these as we go along the presentation. So we have the 2-1 buy down. There's options with no money down. I want to talk about reducing the price versus giving a sales concession and how it can be beneficial to do one over the other. Seller second loans. So sometimes a seller can take out a loan for the buyer to help purchase the house. So we'll talk about that. Rehabilitation loans, and then some non-traditional mortgage options that are available to clients right now as well. So the 2-1 buy down, the star of the show, really in general, people don't know what this is. They've heard the term kind of floated around, but what it is you buy your interest rate down. The seller pays some sort of closing cost credit and they buy the interest rate down 2 points or 2 percentage points. So let's say it's 7%. For the first year, just the first year of the mortgage, it's 5%. And for the second year of the mortgage, it's 6%. And then the third year, it goes back to what the market is. So this is really good for someone. I have some details here, but this is really good for someone in a situation where maybe they're in a job that they're going to be promoted in a couple of years. And so they can afford a higher payment, but it's not ideal for them because their circumstances right now. We are hopeful that the market will shift a little bit and we'll be able to refinance people into a lower interest rate for a long term. But this does give people flexibility. And in reality, they'd be getting like the market rate without doing this program. So to me, there's just a huge benefit up front for the borrower. But specifically, I love clients who like nurses who are maybe in school and per diem who can afford the mortgage, but are going to be making a lot more in a year or two. This is just spectacular for someone like that who's, going through a process where they're going to be making more money over the next couple of years. This really is more for someone who qualifying is not the problem. It's more that they have a budget in mind and what they're comfortable with, and that's what's holding them back from buying. So this wouldn't really help someone who doesn't qualify right now. This is really more for someone who qualifies but says, the rates right now are making me feel uncomfortable and I don't love it. It really gives them another option. So the way it works is the buyer essentially pays off the difference between the mortgage payment at the lower rate and the higher rate upfront. So for example, for a 2-1 buy down on a $400,000 house with 3% down, we would need the seller to pay about $9,000. And what that $9,000 is made of, it's made out of savings for the first year of $500 a month, so that's $6,000. And then year 2, they save about $250 a month. And so that's the other $3,000. So basically the seller is paying upfront for the savings that the buyer's going to have. But as you can see, that's a lot more impactful, right? If I know I'm going to save $500 a month for a year and $255 for the next year, I mean, that is a game changer between getting me into a house where I'm comfortable versus me deciding to wait until next year to buy when we don't know what the market or the rates are going to even be. A lot of my clients who decided to wait, I can tell you they all regret it. And I just say, hey, listen, the right house wasn't out there at that time. And I firmly believe that everything happens the way it's intended. But logically, it's like, oh, rates were lower, prices were lower. It would have been easier and better to buy before. So waiting never really worked for anyone because we can always look at things in the future and work through it. At the end of the day, for my clients, if you're comfortable paying the mortgage and you love the house you're going to be in, it doesn't matter if the value of the house goes down or rates go down, because if rates go down, we'll refinance. If the value of the house goes down and you still love it, like we're still in okay shape. So I really try to go over different things with my clients to make sure I understand what's important to them. And one major piece is that monthly payment. So this 2-1 buy down can be really, really beneficial for the seller's side because they're only really taking $9,000 less than asking. So what they do is they accept a full price offer of, let's say, $400,000, but they give a seller credit for $9,050 that goes towards a buy down. Does that make sense? Kind of. Do you guys understand how this works? Does anyone have any general questions?
What does the language look like in a buyer's offer to a seller?
So it would say basically seller to provide, $9,050 towards, I always say closing costs, seller concessions, and 2-1 buy down. And the reason I do that is, let's say you wanted to ask for $10,000, we could use whatever's left towards other closing costs. So it's okay if you ask for more. So for example, on a conventional loan for $4,000 or $400,000, you could get $12,000 towards closing costs. So that could really help someone who maybe doesn't have as much money. So I just added in. So towards buyer's closing costs, prepaid items, points, 2-1 buy down. Like I include all of it because if it can go towards anything, then we're covered, and I would just defer to your attorney to ask how they want it covered. But that's what I've seen on multiple contracts.
But it's a seller credit.
Yep.
And it effectively reduces the purchase price and probably if net, the commission to the agents, or should.
Yeah, yes, it depends how your agreement is
Right,
with the
right, right,
seller,
right.
but if it's based on a net commission, then that would be deducted from what they're getting. Yes, because the
Right.
seller's not going to get that money anymore. They're getting, 400,000 for the house, but then they're paying out of pocket 9,000 towards closing. So that will be deducted from what the seller's proceeds would be.
But buyer is financing the higher amount.
Yes, exactly. Yep. So you're not doing a price reduction. You're buying the house at the 400,000. Correct.
Got it. Norm's got a
And
question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Norman?
Katie, hi. So the buyers still have to qualify for let's say the interest rate was 7%. The buyers still have to qualify at that interest rate, not the lower interest rate.
Correct. The qualifying factor is still the higher rate. So this would not be for someone who didn't qualify before. There are options later in my presentation for someone like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So this to me it's a really great option for the right person. There are other options I might pick for other situations, but this one can be a game changer, like for the right person, and could get someone off the fence. Excuse me, could get someone off the fence who's been thinking about buying, but they're like, oh, you know what, I'm in school right now. And yeah, I have a good job and I'm going to make so much more in a year or two. Like, this is a great program to say, oh my God, I have the perfect program for you. Because that situation comes up a lot. I have a lot of people who are in school while they're making a living. They can afford the mortgage, but they're like, I'm not comfortable with this high of a payment right now. So that's just something to consider when, talking to people about if they're ready to buy a house or if you have someone who's been thinking about it. Any other questions on that?
Yeah, question.
Yeah.
So for a 2-1 buy down versus the seller buying down the points, is there a different financing or cost for that?
So I'll go over that later in the presentation. That's another section of options.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. That will hopefully, and then we can come back to any follow-up questions you have once I present that. Okay.
Thanks.
Perfect.
So I'm still not 100% clear on what the benefit to the seller is.
The benefit is that they get a buyer. So this would be for a seller to get a larger buyer pool.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So it's not something like you typically would offer when you first put a house on the market if you're trying to gauge the interest in it. It's something that if it's been sitting for a minute, and for me, it's really more of a buyer program that can help, because it really can help people get off the fence if they're not sure what they want to do, or if they want to get into maybe a slightly higher price point. This could get them into a higher price point to get more of what they're actually looking for. I mean, I know my clients, they always want more than they're approved for. And so if something like this can make them more comfortable right now, because they know that what they're doing in the future will make them more money, they're a lot more comfortable. Because I don't want to rely on refinancing them. I don't want someone in a position where they can't afford the 7%. I want to say, hey, listen, there could be an option for us to refinance. So that's something we're going to watch while you're in this program, and you're going to make more money in a couple of years. So this program could be really good for you, because we know that that's going to happen, right? I know that when a nurse graduates, and now she has a different designation, I don't know the different ones, but they're paid automatically more, even if they're at the same job. They can go from $20 to $30 an hour. So knowing that they're in that situation, like I said, this would be somewhere where I might recommend them doing this. So it's really to get a house sold.
Right. So the seller can offer the credits, or the buyer can say, if I make this full price offer on this house that's been sitting here for however long, I will give you a full price offer if you'll do this credit.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other reason this is working so well right now is because we're coming off of such a competitive market. So the values are being sustained by the appraisals. So when you roll in closing cost or seller concessions to the price, there are certain times in the market where the value is not supported by what things are selling for, but because everything is sold so quickly and so much over asking, I'm not, knock on wood, this could come up, but I'm not really seeing issues with appraisals like supporting the value of that price.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. All right, so the next option for buyers who are kind of struggling in this market or maybe on the fence is there's a lot of options with no money down. And this could be good to add into a listing that's been a little stale as well, depending on where the property is. There's a couple different options for that. So USDA loans are certain areas of the state. I'll show you that next. Mass Housing is a program through Massachusetts. It's funded by the government and it helps with lower closing costs, lower interest rates, lower mortgage insurance, and also down payment assistance, which can be really, really helpful. It gets a lot of our clients into homes for the first time. A lot of their programs are first time buyer related, but they do have programs outside of that as well. And the reason it's amazing is because for some of my clients who maybe have a little bit of money, it gives them the money to keep in their bank and they can buy a house without that money down. So it also gets people who maybe don't have much money saved. And then grants. There's different grants available throughout the state that could be utilized in addition to even down payment assistance. So USDA, and if you look at this map, it is online and you can also type in addresses on USDA website. But this map is basically showing you what's eligible. So as you can see, there's a lot of the Cape that is eligible in the green. It's the white areas that are not eligible. So USDA loans are based strictly on property address and something being in that town or city. It does have an income limit, but it's zero down. It's 100% financing. The mortgage insurance is very reasonable. We had seen a lot of these programs kind of fall off because it was such a seller's market that sellers didn't want someone who wasn't putting any money down. This is also considered a government loan, so it does have extra requirements on the property condition that you want to just be aware of. But once again, it's a great way of financing for someone who maybe doesn't have all of the money down. USDA is also amazing because if the value comes in higher, the buyer can finance the closing cost even if the seller wasn't giving them a credit. So let's say you were buying a house for $390,000 and it came back at a $400,000 value. USDA would allow you to cover $10,000 of your closing costs and increase the loan amount. So that can be a really good thing. Anytime I can keep money in my client's pocket for reserves, for home repairs, or for anything they want to do in the future, I love to do that. So Mass Housing, we are number 2 in the entire state for Mass Housing. Are the number 1 loan officers in our office as well. We're very, very versed in these. They have a lot of nuances, is what I'll say. So they're not necessarily hard to do, but they have a lot of moving parts when it comes to the guidelines. So people get really scared of them because most likely they've originated at one time, made a mistake, and then someone wasn't eligible and they got upset. But when you understand the nuances of the programs, they're very easy. It's the same process from a realtor's point of view as a conventional loan. There's no additional requirements. The only time there's additional requirements is when their grant was available. So they did have an amazing grant available. They're expecting it to become available in the spring again. There is one extra little layer when that's part of it because the grant gets approved like 3 days before closing, but we know the guidelines of the grant. So the underwriters are approving it based on those guidelines. It's not that we're going to get surprised and have it denied. It's just a formality that it has to go through their back office. They check it off and it moves on. So they have 2 different programs. One is low income and one is moderate income. And the low income program, unbelievable. It's no mortgage insurance. It can help with closing costs and they give you up to 10% down towards the down payment. That's in the form of a second loan, which means they have the main mortgage and then an additional one, but there's no interest on it. And you don't have to remember these details. This is where we come into play. I want you to remember enough to be dangerous and just send them right to us. So you don't have to write down 0%, 5%, 10%, whatever. Just know, oh my gosh, someone just talked to me about this amazing loan, for someone with certain income guidelines, and this could help you. That's all you need to know. And then there's a moderate income one where 5% down is covered. And these income limits, there's certain income areas in Mass that they go up to 157,000. So this is not a super low income program. You don't have to make 30 or 40,000 a year. It goes up much higher. Even the lower income is based on house size. So if you have a family of 5, there's some areas that go up to 80, 90, 100,000. So once again, this is something we would consider for the buyer, but you want to make sure you're sending them to someone that has additional programs because that could get them into a much higher home. If you have someone with mortgage insurance that's $100 a month versus someone who doesn't have that, I mean, that could be a difference of them, getting a $30,000, $40,000 mortgage higher. So that's the difference between them getting a house they like and a house they love. $30,000, $40,000 can really make a difference in a buyer's pre-approval. And so that's why it's important that you're working with lenders who offer all different types of programs so they can help the buyer and guide them towards what's best for their specific situation. Does anyone have any questions on the mass housing program?
I have just one quick question, and it's not necessarily on that program. Will you be sharing these slides?
Yeah, I can definitely do that.
That would be great, especially with the USDA, so I can sort of get an idea of the different areas.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
And USDA does also have a website that you can type in the address of any properties, but I find the map to just be a nice, good snapshot of, hey, don't look in this town. This town's good. So
Good to know. Thank you.
I can send the map as well.
Yeah, we'll make sure, Norman, that when we Raymar always edits the video. When we post the video in the comments there, we'll upload the PowerPoint, and then we'll put the link to that so everybody can have access.
Yeah,
to it.
I can give you the actual document with the map as well, so you can enlarge it and stuff.
Thank you. You're the best, Lisa.
Yeah,
But you knew that.
She is the best. Okay, awesome. So the other option is grants. I forgot to put a slide, but basically you always want, if someone's looking for grants to buy a house, you really want them to check locally, because there are grants available on a town and city basis, but they change so rapidly. There's really no way for us as a lender to stay abreast of what's available, because a lot of times they're limited times, but there definitely can be things available. So that's something, if you have a house in a certain town, you could ask them. It's always about the town that you're buying in. So if you're buying in Plymouth, they want to go to the town of Plymouth. And so you as a seller's agent could find out, like, hey, there's a grant available for this property. And that could be really valuable in your listing to say, call the town of Plymouth regarding the Plymouth Town grant, whatever it might be. So that's something to consider to put on your checklist, depending on the price range of the house, of course, but if it's between, $250 and $450, that could be a good sweet spot for getting assistance as well, because those are all income-based too. Actually, sometimes I've seen them not even be. So you really want to find out what their requirements are. So price reduction versus sales concession. This to me is such a big thing right now, because there are houses sitting on the market for 30, 40, 50 days. And it's like, what do we do to get this moving? And so I always say, bring it down a little bit so it re-pops up, but maybe change. I've seen my agents change their listing. So maybe in the beginning of it, it'll say offering, X amount of money towards seller's closing costs to buy down interest rate, or to offer a 2-1 buy down. But it can be a big difference in the price. So I gave this example, it's a $400,000 house, 5% down conventional loan, and they're allowed $12,000 towards seller's concessions. Look, some on a video. My daughter just popped in. Bye. Thank you for coming. Well, I don't know if she thought I was talking to myself about mortgages. I guess I do love them that much. So you're allowed 3% towards seller concessions in this case, in the 5% down conventional loan space. And so if you were to use that $12,000 and pay 2 points to get the interest rate down, you would save $175 a month. If you reduce the price by $12,000, that same buyer would only save $76 a month. So for the seller, the numbers are created equal, but for the buyer, there's a bigger impact on them getting closing costs to buy down the interest rate. And this would be more permanent. So this is the difference, Ida, between the 2-1 buy down and paying money towards points. And I will say it does depend on what the market looks like. And so sometimes, like, the good news is if you get that seller credit, we don't have to use it towards the buy down. That's why I use the language to encompass everything, because depending on where the blips in the rate are, I sometimes tell them, actually, the 2-1 buy down doesn't make sense for you anymore. We can buy down this permanently for this, and this is where that gets you. So maybe they won't get 5%, but maybe they'll get, 5.75. And so I'm going over those things with the client. So sometimes, what I initially think could be best for them might change based on what the market's doing once they find a house. But that's the value of working with a lender who understands the difference as well. Because if you write in the contract that you can use this towards a buy down points, closing costs, escrows, prepaid items, I can use it for whatever makes most sense for the buyer once they're under agreement. Does that part make sense to everybody? Because it doesn't, like, one is not always better than the other. It really depends on what the market's doing, because you have to go by the market rate for the buy down. And sometimes the market rates can be a little inflated. And so they're closer to other rates. So you can buy it down more. So that's really for me to kind of figure out with the client. But if they can pay that money down and get 5.75 versus 7%, like, I may recommend that over a short-term fix, because I know at least, hey, if the market doesn't change, you're good, because this is much more comfortable for you. So yes, they don't get as much savings as the other one, but that's only for 2 years. This is a more conservative long-term solution for someone who's, not as risk averse, or maybe their situation is their income is going to be very steady over the next few years.
Yeah. And I want to mention here at this point, we've heard a lot, and it was cute. And we all said it, date the rate, but love the house, marry the house. And like, that's cute, that's important, but it's also could be potentially dangerous. That's how we all got into trouble in another time frame. I think it's important to not think, not go into it planning to refinance. And so some of these, like this one is definitely more conservative approach. And I think, that's what we have to, as agents, good agents, we're really looking at our clients, and we're kind of doing a disc analysis on them. We're also understanding, what their goals are, and then really, where they are in terms of their W-2 income. Are they, young, late 30s, early 40s, sky is the limit, or are they, I don't want to say the back nine, looking right at you, Norm and I, but are they are they in another phase of life where that may not, so I think it's just really important to keep that in mind. I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. That is 100% a conversation that we have with our clients as well, is you cannot rely on refinancing. While we hope that will be the case over the next year or two, I want my client to understand that this is what they're tied into, because I've had them say, oh no, don't worry, I'll just refinance. It's like, halt. That's not necessarily the best way to approach it, because and that's the other reason I try to keep more money in their account right now, because they're paying, everything's going up in cost, right? Groceries, gas, all that stuff. Like, there's a lot more cost. So I want them to be prepared to weather the storm, to keep their house. That's my goal, is to keep someone in their house, as long as they want to live there. And so these conversations are really important, because like I said, for one person over another, a certain loan may make more sense. And I keep using that nurse example, just because it's, to me, a really good example of someone who we know their situation's changing in a year or two, especially if they're going still in school. Whereas, someone who's worked for the town for 20 years, theirs is not going to be as different. It's maybe a certain percentage every year, and then they're going to be retiring, getting less of a percentage. Like, we want to know who we're talking to as the buyer and what their situation is, so that we can give the best advice. So non-traditional programs, there are some non-traditional programs still out there with loans. So I must have missed a slide, but that's okay. So there's two real options. There's rehabilitation loans, and then there's the non-traditional programs. So rehab loans are something that a lot of sellers weren't entertaining, and for good reason. They take a little bit longer. They can be a lot more moving parts. The cost of rehab materials were super, super high last year. So this program, I didn't do any rehab loans last year. I'm very familiar with them. It's just didn't come up as an option for most of my clients. Contractors were all booked out, but I'm seeing, contractors start to free up. The cost of materials is going down a little bit, and sellers are more open to something that could be used. So if you have a house, maybe that's been listed, that's, there's certain issues with it, and that's what's turning the buyers off, presenting a rehab loan, or could be eligible for a rehab loan, ask your lender kind of thing, can just prompt the conversation and the thoughts going through the buyer's head that's an option. So things that are really common for rehab loans, anything that's outdated could be used for a rehab loan. They can do things like septic. If the house has peeling paint and you're finding that everyone who wants to make an offer on it is an FHA or a government loan type of client, you could potentially look at a rehab loan instead. So there's different options. If the seller can't fund some of those repairs that maybe need to be done ahead of time, there's different options for them to look at. And the rehab loan is one of those. Norman?
So how did you know I was going to ask a question?
Because you unmuted.
So are you saying that the seller can actually get the rehab loan?
No, what I'm saying is that,
Okay,
like, sometimes I'll see a listing, throw it in. Like if you know, hey, this had a failed septic,
Yeah.
you know, I'll see that the list agent is putting that in, you know, ask
Yeah.
your lender about potential rehab loans. But they're putting it in for a reason, because there's a lot of agents out there that don't know what they're doing and don't know about these programs. So for some reason, when agents see that, especially when they're not as versed, they're like, oh, this is eligible for a rehab loan. Awesome. They don't realize that really any house is eligible, right? You can do a rehab loan on any house, but it just gets the buyer side thinking about what's possible. And so, like, whenever these listings are stale, obviously you usually know why, right? Maybe your seller wouldn't come down on price, or there's like some things, maybe major renovations need to be done, like a furnace or bigger ticket items that are scaring buyers away. Like, that allows you to think of all these options to just get that listing back in front of people and get the right buyer for it, because there's still an opportunity to get top dollar for sellers. And I'm sure you're all seeing that.
So let me ask you, Katie, walk us through, and first of all, talk about the difference between a construction loan and a rehab loan. And then walk us through, if we have a house that might be what we affectionately call a dog with fleas, what would be the steps? First of all, obviously getting over that energetic discussion with your seller, not
Yes.
the dog with fleas part, but the fact that this might be not.
Yeah.
And then what do we need to do as agents to get something like that rolling, to get that ball rolling?
Yeah, so I can definitely explain that. So the difference between a construction and a rehab loan is usually the amount of work that's being done. So rehab loans can turn into construction loans if the repairs are essentially rebuilding the house. So construction loan mostly is used for land where you're building a house on it, and then you're financing everything from there. Whereas a rehab loan, you're taking a current existing property and you're rolling repairs into the mortgage. So for example, if a septic is $30,000 and you're buying a house for $370,000, that new purchase price becomes $400,000. And this is general numbers. There's some upfront cost and things like that are rolled into the loan. But we essentially roll in all of the financing for the rehab costs so that the buyer doesn't have to come up with them out of pocket. So as an agent, you're going to want to have a good contractor partner that can help you with these, because I can tell you, getting or working with the wrong contractor can waste months of your time and the seller's time. I've seen it over and over again. And they're like, oh, well, I don't know. I just called around. And it's like, if you don't have a contractor partner, I would not recommend this. If you can get a referral to someone through your agents or through your partners, definitely do that. But you want a strong contractor on the other end. There's paperwork that needs to be done by the contractor up front. But from your standpoint, you would just want a pre-approval that states it's a rehab loan, and you would work that into your offer, and you would just say, we're willing to offer $370,000 for this house, but the finance is going to be a rehab loan. And you always want to write how much you're expecting the rehab to be, so that protects your buyer as well. Once again, talk to an attorney about the real wording, but the things that I've seen are, rehab loan or repair costs not to exceed $30,000. Something like that, because there is a maximum that the buyer can really do based on their financing. So sometimes what can happen as contractors go out is things come up that we weren't expecting that need to be done, if they're opening up a wall or something. So we want to make sure that we're protecting the buyer by giving a maximum amount of rehab that would be kind of financed into everything.
So use numbers. I'm still not exactly clear on, like, what's the purchase price? What is the,
so the purchase
the
price
buyer financing?
Yeah, for the purchase price, it'd be $300,000, like, or $370,000, I'm sorry, would be like what the seller's going to get. But my new purchase price, because I'm looking at the acquisition, let's call it an acquisition cost instead, I guess.
Okay.
So we have a purchase price and an acquisition cost. The acquisition cost includes repairs. So then you add $30,000 to it, and that's $400,000. My loan is based on a $400,000 cumulative acquisition cost with the purchase and the repairs.
But
seller
doesn't know that, only if they noticed the mortgage contingency has something a little fruity.
To me, it should be really worked in because it can lead to a lot of problems later if you're trying to just sneak it in the side. So in my opinion, in the, in the notes section or where you add additional provisions, and once again, talk to an attorney, make sure you're protected, but these are where I see them on our agreements. It's written in, buyer to be utilizing a rehabilitation loan, rehab to, not exceed $30,000, all loan amount will end up being based on final rehab amount. Like, so there's some little terms you can put in there to make sure the seller knows what you're offering and that this is a rehab loan.
Would that jeopardize a mortgage contingency?
Not if it's written properly, no, because we do a couple things. We make sure the house is worth what you're buying it for and the cost. So we look at the completed cost of the project. So you're protected there with the mortgage contingency. And if it's higher than the amount that you listed out, technically we can deny them for the loan because now the costs exceed what we expected them to. So they no longer qualify.
That's why I was asking if it would jeopardize the mortgage contingency 3-4 weeks down the road.
No, nope. As long as it's written properly. So talk to an attorney about how they're comfortable because I have seen it a few different ways. Yeah.
No, it is good, but that's a really good. Make sure you get your language. Do not make up your language, agents.
No,
make sure you get the language from.
And don't just be like, oh, I saw this on an offer I got that came through because that's not always like. That's why I don't say that that's the right way because my agent could be writing it wrong too. And if an attorney sees it, they could say, oh no, they're not protected if this happens. And when you're giving larger deposits, it can be a big difference. So
and make sure the contractor knows how to do these types of programs because there's a lot of paperwork that comes with it. And then me, Joe Schmo, probably has no idea. So it does come with a lot of paperwork that the lender needs. So it's good to have a contractor that knows and understands it so it doesn't delay the process.
Yeah. And one more note to that is depending on the program, they don't get paid all at once for the work to be done. So one of the programs gives you half up front and half after the work's completed. And the other program, it depends on how much repairs you're doing, gives you money only upon review of completed projects. So a lot of times I recommend working with a contractor who maybe has a bigger operation. So they have access to, a line of credit that they use for the repairs. The good news is with contractors, some of them just need to know they're going to get paid. There's a lot of work they do sometimes that goes unpaid. So when they do these, they know the bank's going to pay them, but they're not going to get paid up front. So there's a risk to them because they might not have the money to put in up front. So you want to make sure they know like, hey, listen, this is paid through the loan. Are you familiar with these? Because that will, make sure you don't have any hiccups later. And we'll talk to contractors. So if you have one that wants to do this, I'm happy to talk about the nitty gritty with them to go over, depending on the loan program they're using, because there are different types of rehab loans. And we'll make sure they're comfortable and know what they're getting into so that they're not surprised later and getting mad that they don't have the money they need. Okay. All right, awesome. So the next options are they're called non-QM programs. So they're non-traditional mortgage programs. And there's a couple I highlighted here. So one of them is called debt service coverage. This is a great option for investors. This allows us to use the rent to offset the mortgage when you're buying an investment property. So for someone who maybe doesn't qualify or has a lot of debts right now, maybe on their books, this could be a really good option for them. They're much higher interest rates, but most of the investors, as long as that debt service coverage, as long as the mortgage is being more than covered by their rent and expenses, like they're wanting to move forward anyway. So these loans can really be beneficial with that. There's also some self-employed borrower loans. So as you know, sometimes self-employed borrowers can write off a lot of different expenses, and that can make it appear that their income is less and they can't afford something. So there are things like bank statement loans that we can look at actual incoming receipts and what goes out to determine their income. This can be really beneficial for someone who maybe, had a couple of years where they were really in startup mode and now they're in growth mode. And so the taxes don't really reflect their earnings. There's also sometimes where they may have had a significant credit event, either a bankruptcy or a foreclosure, short sale, and they don't meet the conventional requirements. So for example, with a foreclosure for an FHA loan, you can do 3 years. But if you have enough money and decent credit and a bounce back, there's options with non-QM programs that sometimes allow less of a time frame. So once again, you don't have to know all the details. You just have to know if someone says, oh, I would have loved to buy, but like send them our way and we'll talk to them, because sometimes it's just a misunderstanding of what their options are, right? Because they talked to one local bank and they had 2 years of self-employment income, but it wasn't great. And they didn't even, but they have a ton of money down and they didn't even know this was an option. So anytime you hear the phrase, I would love to buy, but like, just be like, go no further. I have the person for you. That's honestly all you need to know is you just send them to the team and we can talk about their scenario and figure out, does it make sense for them to apply? Or are we looking at waiting for some specific reason? Because sometimes they do have to wait, but sometimes they just don't understand what's out there. So that is the presentation. I think, did I cover? I feel like I missed a slide. Hold on. Let me just go back. Nope, I guess I did. Oh, seller seconds. I did miss a slide. I'm so sorry. So I really wanted to talk about doing a seller second. Right now, a lot of sellers have a ton of equity in their homes. And so they're going to be making, a fair amount of money from the sale. Well, if they have a buyer who could afford the mortgage, like that's not a problem, but they don't have the money down and their income's on the higher side, so they don't qualify with these other programs, because a lot of these no money down programs have income requirements. But I have a lot of clients who make a lot of money, but their rent is so high right now that they haven't really had the opportunity to save a ton. You can do a seller second. So the seller basically would hold a mortgage as the down payment, and there has to be terms to that. So it has to be like a fixed term, like fixed interest rate. The interest rate, has to be greater than market rate, which I'm sure they'd be fine with that. Or sorry, it's no less than 2 points less than market rate, because it doesn't want to look like they're giving them this to like kind of financially incentivize them to buy it. So it has to be like a real loan. So for example, if you had a 7% interest rate on a mortgage, and I'm using that's high now, but that was the case for a second. So they would say, okay, the interest rate for the second loan has to be 5% or higher, or it becomes a seller concession, which you don't want it to do. So if someone was looking at a $400,000 house and needed a 5% down payment, they could give them $20,000 and have the buyer pay it back over a certain term. And it doesn't have to be 30 years. It could be 10 years. It has to be greater than 5 is the requirement. So that can be an option. It does depend on the loan program that the person does. So you want to make sure that you're talking about that with the lender of the person who has the buyer that likes the property. But if the buyer is making out like a bandit on the sale and they don't mind holding up, 20, 30,000, this could get someone into a home that otherwise wouldn't have that option.
So walk us through that.
Yeah. So the agreement's drawn up by an attorney, so we don't get involved in that at all. Basically for us, it's no difference than, these down payment assistance programs where there's a second loan that helps finance the down payment. So they'd have a loan for, let's say the $20,000. It would be a fixed rate for a certain term. I would have to include that when qualifying my people and make sure that it's okay with the loan program that they're doing. But there are conventional programs that allow that.
Okay.
I know that one's a wild card, but it can be a game changer right now.
Right. Well,
Especially if
and
the
that's
seller's
kind
getting
of
loans.
the same in the same sandbox as kind of an assumable mortgage. I just had a client, a seller, who talked to their lender and assured me that their mortgage was assumable. And a lot of the folks have mortgages now, sellers mortgages at 2.18.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
This kind of thing. And especially when you're talking about, which is rare, but you're talking about more of a luxury sale where the numbers are pretty big and jumbos are a little frightening, that sometimes some of that assumable. So tell it, what's that all about and how would we?
So an assumable mortgage means that someone goes through the application process of qualifying for the mortgage that you already have in place. So you'll see this a lot more with local banks who hold the money themselves. You'll also see it with FHA loans. The real thing you want to be aware of is oftentimes there can be a clause written in that the seller is still liable for the loan. So that would work if they were selling it to their child, right? They wouldn't care as much. or a family member, but if they're selling it to a stranger, that's something they wouldn't want. And I'm not saying that's in all
Got
assumable
it.
mortgages.
You want to
it's
make
just
sure
a
it's not a
question.
you want to make sure it's not co-signing.
Yes, because certain assumable mortgages actually state that the original buyer is liable for, like
Seller.
mispayments and stuff like that.
Yeah. Interesting. So are you seeing that, or you don't see that because total mortgage being
I don't see that. I have tried to help facilitate, and ultimately people found out they weren't really eligible, but I just work with it's with the current lender who has it. We have some FHA loans that are assumable, but all of them have the clause in it that it's really still under your liability. So I would never recommend that be the case unless it was, like I said, a family member or a child. If my child wants to buy my home and they can have 2.99, awesome. I'll do whatever I can to help them. That's a different situation. So, and we don't get paid on assumable mortgages. So I just act as a facilitator to help if that comes up. It's not something we offer and that we originate.
Yeah, right. So one more question, then I'm going to open it up for sure. Tell us, I know that you do a lot of VA and you feel very good about that. And as, as citizens, we always feel good about, extending that hand. As realtors, we go, kind of make that.
So let me ask you, what makes you so about VA?
I think the appraisal clause has been something that is a little, can be daunting depending on, the deal.
Sure.
Peeling paint and missing a railing, this is kind of that government kind of stuff. And then honestly, my experience of it in the last couple of years, the rates were not any more attractive than many others. And because it looked as if whoever was in charge of VA in Washington for a couple of years, they all went on a coffee break at the same time. And it was impossible if you had something that needed an adjustment or an answer, that piece was impossible. So so that's kind of, what are you seeing with the VA loans?
Yeah, so I did not deal with that. I did deal with their appraisal process can be a little daunting because they have so many business days where they can get it back to us. So you can't ask them, hey, can we get a rush on this? We do things really quickly. We can close loans in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, no problem. But with a VA loan, that's not the case. They technically have 10 business days to do the report. So we have to just adhere to what they have. And we can sometimes say, hey, this is more time sensitive, or they see the dates and they do faster, especially right now where it's slower. But I didn't have any issues with VA corporate because I don't issue a pre-approval until I have a certificate of eligibility, unless they're active duty, because active duty, it takes a minute for them to come back. So I don't want to delay their process, but we really try to make sure that we've done anything with the VA ahead of time so that we don't have to wait for them on something. I do find that especially the bigger VA lenders like Veterans United or USAA, they had a ton of issues last year. I mean, I took over a loan almost a month and a half after they had an offer accepted, and USAA hadn't even done an appraisal. I took one over from Veterans United, who had done the appraisal right away, but the borrower hadn't heard from them in a month and a half. It turns out they really weren't qualified. We were able to figure out a solution around it, but that's my guess, is they just kind of shut down because they're like, oh no, this person doesn't qualify anymore and I don't know what to say, so I'm just going to disappear. So I did see a lot of that because it was so busy that they're like, well, I don't need this, and they just kind of forget about it. So I will say that using more of a local lender who offers VA is definitely going to give you a lot more control, because they'll blame it on the VA, but it's really their company. It's Veterans United or it's USAA. It's not the VA at all. They're like, oh, well, the VA has processes. Yeah, the VA has processes, but in our world, a VA loan, if my processing team gets a VA loan, they don't say, oh my God, are you serious? It's the same process for us, They might say that with a rehab loan, but that's okay. We still do them. Because those are a lot more paperwork. There's really no difference, in my opinion, with a VA loan. I always look, if the borrower does have down payment funds, I always look at the VA versus the conventional, with down payment loan. And the reason is I kind of want them to save that if they can use it to refinance later, because the rates, if they're similar, I know that maybe in the future, a rate with a cash out refinance could be much better with a VA loan. So I usually will look at both options if they're putting money down and just see what works better, because I want them to get their offer accepted. So if that means doing a conventional loan because there's less requirements on the loan, then that's great. I've also done pre-approvals where we have a note section. So we put in the notes, that the buyer is also qualified for a conventional loan if there are VA loan related items that cannot be overcome, so that the seller knows, hey, we're going to try a VA loan. They gave a lot of service and this loan is a thank you for that because the loan is much better for them. But if that doesn't work, we can switch them to a conventional, and the agreement states that, like the contract. So I did that twice last year. It worked out really well because in that market, it's like sellers wanted to help veterans, but didn't want to get stuck with a VA loan. So when they knew that they had the option of conventional, if something came up, they really liked that.
Yeah, that's perfect. Really.
So we're always kind of being creative like that.
Yes, you are.
We do what we can.
Hey, let me open this for some questions. Other folks have questions about any of the content that Katie shared or kind of another situation. Again, my commitment to all of you is that we will have this by Monday during the day, most likely on, posted kind of everywhere on our YouTube channel, but posted on my feed and give it to Katie. She'll post it everywhere. And we will put a link to the slides in that post when we
Yep,
send.
and the PDF of the USDA locations.
So
Katie, I have a question.
Yeah, raise your hand and just jump in.
Oh, okay. Regarding VA. Okay, so if the seller has a VA loan, it's assumable another VA buyer is looking to buy it.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the original owner, or I guess the original person on the loan is liable for it, even
No.
if it's a VA that's
Could be.
assuming that.
So could be liable. I have not seen that in the VA loans. I've seen it more with local banks. So I don't expect that to be the case with the VA assumable loan, but that would be a question you would want to make sure your seller asks of the bank that they have the loan with. And then the bank would help the new buyer do the approval process for the assumption.
Yeah, again, that's one of the reasons why we do these masterminds. So learning about those, being more curious, what are some more of those questions we need to know? Does this loan product, assumable loan product, does it have the clause in it where the seller is still ultimately responsible? That it's not nearly as attractive to the seller, that's for darn sure, to do that, or to the buyers. I mean, obviously to the buyers. So great question though, Ida.
So I have another question for basically pertaining to that. So the seller has an assumable loan, but then there's also balance difference of that. The buyer was looking into doing an FHA for the other loan. Is that something that's doable, or does he have to do a separate financing for whatever the current balance is of the value?
So if you assume the mortgage, my understanding is that you have to come up with the difference yourself.
Okay.
And pay the bank that currently has the mortgage. So I don't believe that you can do a separate VA or FHA loan. The FHA loan would only be used if you were using that as the means to buy the house alone. Does that make sense?
Okay, so he can't use the VA assumable loan and then on top of that, an FHA. He'd have to come up with a conventional or cash.
I don't even know. They would potentially have to come up with like a non-traditional loan. We can't just do a conventional loan for like $150,000 to pay down the difference of what the seller had. The bank that they're doing the mortgage through, like the one that you're doing the assumption through, they may have an opportunity to do, a second home equity or something like that. But you wouldn't typically go to like a mortgage broker or someone like myself to get that, because we really only focus on financing properties in the entirety. But that is definitely a good question for you to ask the bank that has the assumption. Hey, what options do you have for them to come up with the difference? Does it have to be cash? Do you have any loan programs that can partner with it? Because they have a lot more flexibility. If you're working with the company that has that mortgage currently, they may have something that couples with it, especially like if I'm, let's say I'm Veterans United and I have a VA loan that's assumable. Right now, I would be looking and researching and creating programs that can partner with that to bridge the gap so that I could have clients assume it and still be able to purchase that property, because a lot of people don't have that money up front to pay the difference.
Right.
Especially if someone bought 2 years ago, the price now versus 2 years ago, just with earned equity is fairly sizable. So I would just recommend that whoever is the company that has the original mortgage that is being assumed, that you ask them if they have any products that can partner with that to help fund that difference or the down payment, so to speak.
Okay.
But
Is there a way
assumable mortgage is totally separate from any of your normal mortgage lenders. It's you go through the bank that has that mortgage currently.
would they allow, like, say, 401k to piggy off of the assumable loan that's being assumed?
So I can only speak, because I'm not as versed as in assumable mortgages, I can only speak to conventional ones. But on a conventional mortgage, if you're allowed to withdraw money from your 401k, we would absolutely use that as funds. So I don't see why on an assumable mortgage, you couldn't do the same. But you would need like a purchase agreement typically when you're reaching out to the 401k company, and then they help you facilitate taking out what you need.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
No
Yeah,
problem.
and I think that's it's so dependent on that seller's bank and what's going on with which we wouldn't necessarily have that much information in because we're working with a buyer's lender for sure. Well, Katie, this has been amazing. We've kept a large group really engaged this whole time. It's just great. I was just listening to a podcast this morning, again, of Brian Buffini, where he talked about, the times when we're starting to, even if it's not a full-on recession, things are changing, right? And you look at strategy and you look at operations and you look at tactics. Those are the things that we always have to think about in our business. And during these times is when we have to keep the strategy top of mind. That's what we can learn about. That's how we can control, really how we're walking in the world, how we're dealing with our clients, and also just energetically, having things that are interesting and inspiring us and things that we want to share with our clients because we're continuing to sort of sharpen our tools and gain skill sets. So these strategies are so important. We look forward to definitely having you back for sure. Lisa Parento team will be having these monthly masterminds as we do. Love to hear from everyone what kind of content. We're building out the marketing calendar now for the first 6 months. Also looking at a quarterly in person. We have a really fun program in EXP where it's called AHA, which is Agents Helping Agents, where you do events in the community that are really broker blind. Actually talked to someone who was just on this call with us, another agent that I've been talking to about really, looking at how we can, create some collaboration between brokerages here on the Cape and have quarterly, a nice event. And we also are considering being able to offer CE for those, just so everybody knows. There's a number of folks that can contribute and help us to get the 2 CEs, which are always helpful for everybody. So working on a couple of fun things. Katie, you have an announcement I know I'm going to let you make, and then we're going to wrap up. Please share with all of these folks who know and love you, most of them. Everyone loves you.
Well, and some people don't know me, but I'm moving to Florida. So I've been part of Massachusetts for 39 years, and I'm making a big move to Wesley Chapel, which is about 45 minutes northeast of Tampa. So my team is still in Massachusetts. We still, I can assure you, will be originating many, many Massachusetts loans, and we'll also be available. I'll be traveling. I do a lot of traveling. So I'm sure that I'll be coming up for different events and things like that. But we're also in Florida to help you there now as well for your clients who are looking to get a little bit of an extra space to keep them warm over the winter. We can definitely help with those as well.
Excellent. Well, we know you won't be far away, and we've lived kind of in this way for a long time.
Exactly.
So that's going to be completely, there'll be a great transition. Thanks everybody again. Your time is so valuable. I really appreciate you spending this hour with us. We'll be back again the second Friday, most likely in February. The usual time is 12, but we'll see. And I'm just thrilled to see you all. Have an amazing 2023. Can't wait till our paths all cross again.
Bye, everyone.